Okay, this is a bit of a breakdown of the Chevy 2.5 for the skid steer, or the cheap skid steer series. This video isn't specifically about the skid steer in general. It's about covering the carburetor conversion of the 2.5 that is going into the skid steer. This is a Chevy 2.5, or really a GM 2.5, out of a 1987 fuel-injected, single-barrel fuel-injected S10. It was actually out of a 4 or 5-speed. I can't remember exactly. And the conversion was done with the factory original distributor. I think you can see it about right there. This is the original one that came out of the truck. It's never even been removed out of the block since we got the motor. It does need to be timed a little bit. Anybody that's watched the previous video. There is a small amount of a timing problem, but it's just because since there's no computer, the timing on this is a little bit different, but I'll go over that here in a second. All you need to make this HEI, this is a external coil HEI ignition, essentially, just like those cheaper ones you can buy off of eBay. They use in Ford motors and Dodge motors a lot. All you need to do is supply the module itself, which I think is either a 5-pin or a 6-pin or 7-pin. I haven't actually been able to quite figure out exactly which one it is, but all you need to do is supply 12 volts to the ignition module inside the distributor, and then 12 volts to the coil. There's actually a 4 TFI coil out of a Bronco from Pick and Pull. That's not the factory Chevy coil, because that one was mounted up and underneath the intake about right there. All you need to do is give 12 volts to the distributor and the coil. Do not ground the coil out. I made that issue, and that's why the original Chevy coil is no longer with us, sadly. Give me a second here. Black wire is the positive right here. That is the positive going into the ignition. This is the negative that goes back out. The brown would go to the negative side of the coil. The black goes to the positive side of the coil and then back to the battery. There is no ground wire that goes to the distributor. And the coil is not grounded either. The ground is actually through the distributor's ignition. The coil is not grounded until the ignition module says it's to. This plug right here, this is for timing and stuff. I think this is the actual visual reluctor non-magnetic pickup. I think it's a light style pickup, kind of like what a 4 TFI would use. This is not needed. This will probably get removed later when we change over to a 4-pin ignition module, possibly, or an external use of I think it's a 7-pin. But that'll be covered in a later video. All you need is the factory distributor and some type of ignition coil. I know for a fact the Chevy TFI coils work, obviously, because we're using one. The factory 4-pin ignition coil will work. I might put in the description of the video what is what in a diagram, or I might edit it into the video depending on what I want to do at the time. I think, don't hold me to this one, but I think a canister style coil will work, like an Excel or something. I do know that an MSD coil will work, but obviously we're not using one of those. Because all you need to do is supply 12 volts to the ignition coil and the distributor's ignition module. All of the fancy crap inside the distributor doesn't actually do anything anymore. Most of it can be removed later if you need to rebuild the distributor. There is no vacuum or mechanical advance that I know of. The module itself is actually advanced electronically and does not need the computer to function. For fuel, we used a 2-barrel, this is actually a 2-barrel, carburetor off of a Dodge B150 or a D150, I can't remember exactly which, a 2-wheel drive 150 Dodge 318 pickup truck from Pick and Pull. This is a Holly, I think you can read that. I've got pretty much every single vacuum port you can think of blocked. but this runs, obviously. You can use all the way up to a Quadrajet 4-barrel if you want to, because they do make an adapter. The way we adapted the 1-barrel intake to the carburetor is we used a, I think it's a 1x6 piece of wood, painted the crap out of it so it wouldn't rot. And then we used a 1x6. This does work. I've actually read about people doing this on race cars to isolate the carburetor from the heat of the motor. And then we used a 2-to-1 barrel. These are bolts. These are not wood screws. These are bolts held in with a basically a wood helicoil. Essentially, you can buy these at Home Depot. They come in a bag of 4. This adapter comes with a 1-barrel gasket. I don't know the exact carburetor that you would buy the gasket for. And then this carburetor is a Holley, and even though it's an OEM carburetor, I think does use the standard Holley bolt pattern. And this 1 to 2-barrel adapter uses the Holley bolt pattern. And this came off of eBay, but I think they're pretty much all the same. So if you're doing a similar conversion, that is a Holley carburetor with a 2 to 1 barrel adapter using a 1x6 as a spacer. This could be done with an aluminum block and or a brick of ABS plastic if you really, really want to. At this time, we don't have the alternator wired, but I will go over that later. So if you are actually doing this in a truck, because this is an S10 2.5. But yeah, I will go over later on how to wire the alternator. It's 1 positive and 1 charge lamp, I think, but I'll cover that later. For fuel, I have not been able to figure out where the mechanical fuel pump provisions, because I do know these motors did come with mechanical fuel pump provisions, but I haven't been able to find out where it would block the bolt to the block. So we ended up using, for now, this El Cheapo Chinese inline fuel pump. I plan on, if the skid steer works and all the lines and stuff work on the skid steer and it moves, I plan on installing a Carter later. So yeah, if anybody does watch this video and knows anything about mechanical fuel pumps on 2.5s, tell me, because I'd like to know where it would have mounted on the block. Because I do know that these motors were in AMC Eagles, and they did have a mechanical fuel pump, but I've never been able to figure out where it bolts on the block. Oh, and another thing about the Chevy 2.5s, and if you are bolting one of these into one of these Thompson/Co-Ring skid steers, like the one we have, a Chevy 2.5, this is the main flywheel on the motor. This is not the skid steer's flywheel off the Kubota diesel this engine originally had. This is the flywheel off the Kubota diesel. This Kubota flywheel shares the same bolt pattern as this is the crank bolt pattern. Haven't drilled this, haven't tapped this, haven't done anything to it. This is the same bolt pattern that would have been used on the 2.5. So I'm pretty sure that the Kubota and the Chevy 2.5 use the same flywheel bolt pattern. The only reason we didn't just go ahead and bolt this flywheel, even though it is roughly the same size as the Chevy flywheel, is because there was issues with mounting a starter with the 2.5 flywheel, not 2.5, but the Kubota flywheel. What we did to bolt them together, we got, I think these were 89 or 90 millimeter long bolts. The at least 2.5s that came out of the S10s use mostly metric fasteners. These are M10s, 10 millimeter bolts with a thread pitch of 1.5. I think these are either 89 or 90 millimeter bolts. And then we used thread-all connectors purchased from 2 different hardware stores. So yeah, the flywheel is attached. They're not actually torqued down, but they're good enough for when we did our first start. We do plan on going back with blue Loctite and Loctiting these. So if anyone wonders why we chose this motor, is because It was roughly the same size as the Kubota diesel, and it was a gas motor. A little bit easier to work on besides the diesels, but works pretty well so far. Very soon, within the next few weeks, we do plan on putting the motor in the skid steer. It is mounted to the factory Kubota cradle so far. It's in there. We do have the wiring done, and I know it looks like crap, but it will be going inside loom very soon. But yeah, it runs. It is no longer fuel injected. It's using a 2-barrel carburetor. If anybody has any questions, say you're doing a carburetor conversion on an S10 that uses one of these motors, just go ahead and ask. I can, you probably provide a handwritten diagram of some type of wiring. It's fairly simple. You just provide 12 volts to the coil and 12 volts to the distributor, and then hook everything up like you would on a TBI truck, and it should be pretty well. It runs. It actually advances. It doesn't bog by any means with that carburetor. We don't actually have the radiator mounted yet, but we will. We've got to figure out a bottom radiator hose and decide whether or not we're going to go with mechanical fan or not, but that's stuff for a further video. If anybody's got any questions about how we did the carburetor conversion on the 2.5, or any questions about anything in general I could possibly help you with, just go ahead and ask. Thank you.